World Economic Forum's 2017 Global Gender Gap Report findings telling us that gender parity is over 200 years away, there has never been a more important time to keep motivated and press for progress. That's the theme for this year's International Women's Day celebration. Well, as we press for progress, many issues affecting women has come to the fore. Key among them is the call for affirmative action bill to be passed into law. Amnesty International is also calling for extended maternity leave for pregnant women, plus so many other challenges retarding the progress of women in our society. These are the issues that will drive our conversation tonight on PM Express. Guess who is my guest in the studio? Believe me, you are already in love with her. Stay right here. I'll be back shortly. Welcome back. My guest tonight, former Gender, Children and Social Protection Minister. She's a lawyer and she's a human rights advocate. You know that. And by now you know who I'm talking about. Nana Oyelisa. Good to see you in the studio.
Good to see you, Aisha.
It's been a while.
Evening.
And you're looking so sweet.
You're looking sweet and amazing too.
So happy International Women's Day.
International Women's
and
Day.
The theme, press for progress. Of course, there's no better time for this theme. It's so energizing, it's so strong. It has the potential of pushing women to do more, correct?
Pushing the world, pushing men, pushing women, pushing governments, pushing the world to do more. We now have the legal framework, we have the laws, we have the policies, we have the strategic plans, but women are still not where they ought to be. And that is why we're looking at implementation, we're looking at pushing for progress, and we're even looking at the talk of a 5th World Conference on Women post-Beijing.
Okay, and what are some of the issues you're looking forward to discussing at this 5th World Conference?
It's likely to come on in 2019, and it's going to be about implementation. We had a platform for action in 1995. Even before that, we went to Nairobi and we had the Nairobi forward-looking strategies. We went to Egypt 1994. That was on world population. And so now, to what extent are we implementing these laws and policies and following these strategic plans to make sure that that young girl in that village is able to go to school, does not get pregnant, is not a victim of child marriage, is able to go to university, and she's able to, in her own time, find a husband if she wants to get married, and then also contribute a quota to her country. So this is what we want for women of the world, and of course women in Ghana.
It's been an interesting course to chart, and a lot of times when you talk about women progressing, what you hear is that, well, we've come a long way. Are you impressed with how far women have come?
I would say it's still work in progress. Definitely we have made some progress. When I became a lawyer and started practicing in the specifically in 1992, and we started some level of activism under the International Federation of Women Lawyers. I remember in 1996 we started speaking to the issue of gender-based violence, and it was strange, you know, people were not, it was not even discussed, and we had a backlash. And at that time we were focusing, that is FIDA, on getting women to know the law and getting women to know their rights in a bid to ensure that women were better protected. Because at that point in time, they didn't even know the law, they didn't even know the rights. So 2-3 decades later, 2018, we now have pepper them, pamper them, sugar them. And the discourse has moved to gender roles. So at least we have moved a little bit down, and I'm sure if you asked an average woman what her rights are, about interstate succession law, what her rights are, she would have an idea of what her rights are. And now we're talking about gender roles. It's still work in progress, and that's why I am particularly happy about the Sustainable Development Goals and the fact that we have our own goal number 5, on gender equality. I believe that will also propel progress in terms of ensuring that we actually, government by government, state by state, country by country, implement programs and plans to ensure gender equality.
That's quite interesting, but of course we're also told that gender parity will not happen overnight. Of course, that's an open secret. We all know that.
Yes.
But it's also amazing to hear that, I mean, day by day, women are making a lot of progress. They're making strides to make sure that this gap is bridged. Why are we not there yet? Or if you like, you say it's work in progress. So how much more do we need to go to get there?
In terms of gender parity, you can look at various sectors. So when you look at education, you realize that in Ghana, we were actually one of the few countries that was able to attain the Millennium Development Goals in 2015 in terms of gender parity as far as education. That is to a certain level, I think is either primary or so we have gender parity. But I would look at women in politics, or women in public life, women in politics, and there are several factors. So I'm just using that one example. So for instance, for us in Ghana, it's been a problem because of the political system that we run, the first past the post system that we run, and the fact that the focus is more on a winnable candidate than the sex or gender of the candidate.
Okay.
So if you look at from 1954,
right,
we started, adult universal suffrage, we started voting. We've never really gotten an appreciable level of women being voted for and elected into Parliament. I'll use Parliament as an indicator. We haven't gotten more than 20%. We haven't gotten more than maybe 15%.
Yeah.
And look at the number of elections that we've had from 1954, 1957, and what have you, all the way down, even for this particular republic.
And we still have about 35
because it's basically, it's 35 women. It's basically first past the post.
Right.
So you can do whatever you want to do. Is a winnable candidate who is going to get us the votes. It's not about. And when you look at the Committee of Experts report for the 1992 Constitution, you realize that it was actually a recommendation by the Committee of Experts that we should have some form of affirmative action for disadvantaged groups, but it didn't really happen. So if we continue to run this political system, then we're not going to get that gender parity. What I'm trying to say is that there are several factors that contribute to the lack of gender parity. And as far as women in political office is concerned, it's because of the political system. And that is why during our time, that the NDC government, President Mahama selected or said that we should pass an affirmative action bill. It's actually in the NDC manifesto, and we submitted an affirmative action bill to Parliament for consideration. It lapsed and is being considered by the MPP government.
Okay, so talking about affirmative action bill, one thing that struck me throughout the celebration today, celebrating women, is the calling for the passage of the affirmative action bill. Let's listen to our women on this.
The affirmative action bill has not been passed into law since the recommendation of the Constitutional Review Commission of 2010. Do hereby resolve to support every effort and call upon His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, through Regional Minister, to push for the passage of the affirmative action bill into law by the end of this year 2018. The current underrepresentation of women in government at both national and local level. Women constitute more than 50% of the Ghanaian population, yet we are underrepresented in decision making in all the important sectors of the economy, including the agriculture sector. Women contribute to about 70% of agriculture production, marketing, and processing, yet agriculture policy, projects, programs, and budget, both at the national and local level, do not respond adequately to the special needs of women. For example, the Planting for Food and Jobs, One Village, One Dam, One District, One Factory, and others passed the present government. Initiative do not specify what percentage of women are targeted to benefit and what special measures are put to place to ensure that the special needs of women are addressed. We, the Women in Agriculture Platform and Young Urban Women Movement, believe that the bill, when passed into law, will provide legal framework for addressing cases of gender inequality against women. We also believe it will give women an equitable share of the national care and fair representation in the decision-making process in all sectors, especially agriculture in Ghana.
So there was some women in the northern region pressing hard for the president to make sure that affirmative for action bill is passed into law, and we all agree that that bill is long overdue. How urgent is this bill?
It should have been passed yesterday. I mean, like, it's very, very urgent, because we should not forget that Ghana was the first African country to pass an affirmative action law under Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, when he brought 10 women into Parliament. And I was just learning this afternoon from the Pepedem conference, ministry, that it was actually Susan Al-Hassan. She was actually the first African woman who was a minister of state, appointed pursuant to that. And so we have led history. So why are we where we are? Fortunately, we started the process, and there was a working group, and we now have a bill, and we're also calling on President Nana Akufo-Addo to ensure that this bill is passed. It would help a lot. The good thing is that we've had a lot of women in public office over a decade or so. We've had a Chief Justice, female Speaker of Parliament, female government statistician, female IGP, female Director General of Prisons, female Director General of Immigration, female Director General of the Ghana AIDS Commission, female Controller and Accountant General, female Electoral Commissioner. So within public office, women have been tried and tested. And all these women that I'm mentioning have excelled. They have done very well. And when you look at the Constitutional Review report, it was also a recommendation. The white paper that came out of it, there was also that recommendation. And in 1992, even in the Constitution of Ghana, that was an obligation on the state to ensure that within a reasonable time we have this law. It will correct an imbalance. Like you said, we have 35 female parliamentarians out of maybe 275 or so. Yes, and that is obviously an imbalance. And then when you actually look at the various sectors, when you look at security, when you look at the judicial service, when you look at public service and other sectors, we find out that we have more men operating in these institutions than women. So when you look at the bill, you realize that there was an engagement with all these sectors, and we're asking for a minimum of 40% representation. We believe that that is what will propel women into public office. And we can see what Rwanda has done. Rwanda is a success story for Africa in terms of how rapidly they have developed. And they have been able to develop because they have recognized the need for this demographic group, right. Women who were marginalized, women who suffered under, through their genocide and conflicts and all that. They've made that conscious, deliberate effort to ensure that we have more women in governance through affirmative action, to the extent that if you look at the Interparliamentary Union statistics, they are tops over and above Europe, over and above Canada in terms of gender representation.
That's
and that is how we should go.
And it's an example we should emulate. But you were a gender minister for the period, and you rightly said that you submitted the affirmative action bill to Parliament. What were the reasons why, or what were the challenges that did not allow the bill to be passed into law before you left office?
Yes, we submitted to Cabinet, it was considered, and then once Cabinet approved, it was presented to Parliament. I think Parliament would be in the best position because we did all that we had to do. We had meetings and sessions with the Constitutional and Legal Committee of Parliament. We had sessions with the Gender Committee and all relevant officers, and we engaged on the bills clause by clause, and everything was fine. And then we were able to send it. Send it. And unfortunately, it didn't go through the different readings, and then it lapsed once once that Parliament lapsed.
Okay, but were you giving some explanations from Parliament committee, the committees that were supposed to work on it? What were the explanations? Was there any reason why
we were not given a specific explanation? What we were told, it was in the pipeline. So
you didn't push hard?
We pushed very hard. We pushed very hard. But then there were other bills that had come before before our bill. So we did push hard, but maybe it was time.
It didn't happen.
Yes, it didn't happen.
Well, so we're hoping that as it's come back on the table, Parliament will see it's necessary to pass this affirmative action bill into law. But on this occasion, the First Lady, Mrs. Rebecca Kufu, has also been talking, and she wants women to empower themselves.
Every girl can be whatever they want to be. That every girl deserves to develop to their full potential, and it starts with education. If we don't act, our free education policy may not mean anything to these girls and their future. I would not be who I am without education. Neither would I be who I am today if I had been born in an environment where child marriage is the norm. So I am passionate about this project. Women must be seen, women must be heard. We should get to that day when equality for women is assumed. To get to that day, though, requires deliberate actions and steps. We have done enough talking. It is time to walk the talk. I will end by quoting Kofi Annan at the World Forum in 2000, and I quote, "No development strategy is better than one that involves women as central players. It has immediate benefits for nutrition, health, savings, and reinvestment at the family, community, and ultimately country level."
So that was Rebecca Kufu, who is the First Lady of Ghana, expressing how women should empower themselves, how women should not, take chances and use every opportunity that comes their way. But it's amazing. I've seen how we do things in this country, how we talk so much. On this beautiful day, we've heard so much grammar, big English, but how do we put it in action? And that's the question I want to put to you. We want to be empowered. Why haven't we gotten there? Beyond the talking, how do we get it done? Because we need action, not talking.
We are empowered. We are empowered. What I'll take from what Her Excellency Mrs. Rebecca Akufo-Addo said was the education, and why she's who she is, because she was educated. And I think that is very critical, because I have watched clips, and it is still a challenge for us, especially in the rural areas and even in the poor urban areas, in some of the areas even within Accra. And I remember I went to Labadi Beach maybe about 2 weeks ago, and it was 8 a.m. and there was a young girl, and this is just Labadi Beach, and she was not in school. And I was told that it could be that her parents could not afford to pay school fees. So this is an issue. We say there's been a lot of talk. We still need to talk and talk and talk, because we are interrogating, we are discussing, and through that we're getting a deeper appreciation and understanding of what the issues are. But we still need to go on the ground and do the work. We still need to do the mainstreaming. We still need to set targets for ourselves. We still need to ensure that the institutions that have been set up actually work in the interests of women, and actually ensure that the gender equality, the gender parity, the empowerment, and the integration and the gender sensitiveness that we want actually works. This is the engine of it all. And so we need to walk the talk. Which institutions are there? We have the Department of Gender, we have the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. We need to be able to have the capacity to collect the data and monitor progress. Because now we have a plan. We have a strategic plan, which during my tenure we put together. We also have a gender policy, and we have a plethora of laws. Now we have to ensure that these are implemented in the best interest of the Ghanaian woman. And this is, from now, this is what we have to do. And I believe this is what pushing for progress is all about.
Okay, so we're also talking about ending early marriage. We're talking about abuse of women, domestic violence. I mean, in your tenure, remarkably, or how remarkable would you say you tackled these issues, that you left a legacy that should be continued?
We did a lot of work. During my tenure, we passed about 6 policies. We passed about 6 policies, policies for children, the Child and Family Welfare Policy, Social Protection Policy, School Feeding Policy, Gender Policy was all passed under President John Dramani Mahama. In addition to that, we had the Domestic Violence Regulations. We had, we're going to have foster care regulations. We amended the Children's Act to restructure and mainstream adoption of children, to ensure that the children were better protected. We also had the juvenile justice policy, and we had the trafficking regulations, foster care, and several others. That so in terms of a legal and policy framework under President John Dramani Mahama, that was excellent. Social protection was new, ground zero. But we did a lot. By the end of the 4 years, we had a policy, we had a national institution to take care of social protection, we had expanded LEAP. Because one major factor for some of these challenges we have in terms of gender is poverty, vulnerability. We hear of, along the coast, girls who become pregnant, teenage pregnancy. In fact, it's throughout Ghana. We have the rural-urban migration. We have a huge problem and challenge with Kayaye, that is the headquarters. We have 3 generations of people living on our streets. And so I'm not surprised that we're having these problems of crime, because these are the social devices that go along with people living on the streets. So we have all these challenges, and what we did was to start a process of addressing vulnerabilities, and by using social protection as a safety net, as a cushion, to ensure that those who were poor, those who lived below $1.25 a day, were catered for through social protection. And in terms of child marriage, we're one of the top 5 in Africa, which is not very good. And when you go to certain places, the prevalence rate is about 50%. If you go up north, there's certain ethnic groups that child marry. So President John Dramani Mahama and Her Excellency Lordina Mahama and about 5 or 6 other First Ladies of Africa, we launched the child marriage advocacy and campaign in Ghana in February, was it 2015 or 2016? So a lot of work was done. And in addition to that, we also launched a strategic plan with support from UNICEF to address child marriages in Ghana.
Okay, so child marriage is one of the things that hinder our progress as women. Of course, if you go to some parts of the area, we're told that progress is being made, but if you go to some parts of the country, you'll still see, I mean, people at very tender age giving out to people as old as their grandfathers to marry, and it's been a problem. I'll take a break. When we come back, we'll look at how we can end this once and for all. Welcome back. You're still watching PM Express, and we are celebrating women today and looking at all the issues affecting women. We want women to be empowered, yet women are faced with a lot of challenges, including the men who are also not supporting women. We'll be looking at how to press the men to support women to succeed. But before I went on the break, Nana, the issue of child marriage is being a huge discussion on our table, and we've been looking for varied ways of ending this child marriage. Why haven't we been successful? Why haven't we been able to completely eradicate it? Do we need to tackle it differently, or what's wrong?
Well, it's basically because it's cultural and traditional, and when you have issues relating to culture and tradition, it's very, very difficult to eradicate. Like we have the female genital mutilation is one, we have trochocity, we have the witch comes, and for all of these, though laws have been passed. For FGM, a law was passed in 1994, but we're still grappling with it, and I hear it's even increased a bit, though it went down. And we also have the witch comes. We were able to close a witch camp down in 2015, 10th of December. I'll never forget that day in 2015. And then also we have trochocity, which is still an issue.
Female genital
mutilation. And the thing is that you cannot use the law, you cannot use legislation to eradicate. Because there has to be legitimacy, because you have gatekeepers.
The law to eradicate
because people believe in the custom. People actually believe that parts of their private part has to be cut off. Their clitoris or whatever has to be cut off because, I mean, for religious or cultural purposes. So some may even move out of Ghana to Burkina Faso and other places
go and do it.
To go and do it. But now we have laws in all these places. So it's just the custom. It's part of you. It's just like how when maybe your husband dies or your spouse dies, you believe that you have to undergo widowhood rites. And it's just the custom. And you would want to perform the custom. And so what happened, and we can use the models, so what happened with FGM and others was that other mechanisms and other strategies in addition to the law was used. And that's why we developed a strategic plan that involves all these other facets. And it was actually launched. And once it's implemented, and once we check, we would and monitor reduction, that will actually happen. I mean, UNICEF has come up with a report that is actually reduced globally, but we need to really work on it.
But if we narrow it down to our country,
in Ghana, we need to work. I don't know whether any data has been collected, because the last was in 2012, the multiple indicator cluster report that showed that we were amongst the top 5 in Africa. So I'm hoping
that's not good news.
No, at all. It's not good at all in terms of our credentials and in terms of what we tout. I mean, of what we stand for.
Right.
Especially now that our president is the gender champion for the AU, we really have to make sure that we are in line.
Definitely, we have no excuse.
We don't have any excuse.
So what has the Ministry of Gender been doing all this while to protect women. The abuse of girls, especially by teachers, ending female genital mutilation, getting children out of the street and giving the girl child some vocation and so on. Well, we caught up with the Minister for Gender, Otiko Jaba. Let's listen to her.
The time is now for us to press for progress so that there is more equity. We have the affirmative action bill. We've been able to review it because it elapsed because of the change of government. It's at cabinet right now, and then when we go through it and it's approved, we'll send it to Parliament. We have a gender policy, we have a Children's Act. It has been amended because of illegal adoptions to be in line with the Hague Convention. We have the ending child marriage policy. We have the FGM one, the Domestic Violence Act. So many policies, but the implementation is poor. And we are also now decentralizing our programs, like the Zero Tolerance International Day for FGM. We didn't celebrate it in Accra. We celebrated it in Pusiga. Like the 16 days of activism, we celebrated it in Dadientim. International Women's Day. Last year, we celebrated it in Prestia. So when you decentralize, it helps the people to get more familiar. And then we are writing a cabinet memo to request that it becomes mandatory that once a month, every community should have a forum to talk about issues of parental neglect, food insecurity, violence against gender, and all the other issues that are holding us back as a people. For as long as any woman, especially, or girl, is treated badly, it means that Ghana still has a lot of work to do. Children on the streets, the kaya, all of those things, child trafficking, domestic violence, all of those things are a measure of where we are. In rural development, in development, the measure of a nation's development is vulnerable people, how they are achieving, how they are moving up. We have the LEAP to support. We are coming up with a new LEAP to be able to move away from cash grants and move into trade, building the self-esteem of people, focusing on the aged, that they are not looked on as alleged witches, especially the females, because it could be just dementia or anything. There are so many issues in a developing country. You cannot wave a magic wand and they will all go. It just takes talk. And it is work in progress. And so I want to say to the people of Ghana, as we celebrate International Women's Day, as we celebrate independence, remember that you are loved by Ghana and that there is hope. And so don't give up on yourself. Wherever you are, it's just geography. Poverty is not for us.
So that was Gender Minister Otiko Afisa Jaba telling us what her ministry has been doing, and she's been wishing all women a happy International Day, and she says we should all feel loved by the country. Listening to her, how do you feel? You think, or are you impressed with the ministry you left not too long ago?
Yes, I'm happy that Honorable Otiko Japa is following with all the work that we did. In fact, she mentioned all that we had done in terms of amendment of the Children's Act, a gender policy, social protection, and LEAP expansion. This is all work that we had done, and I'm happy that she's going by the book and actually implementing and following up and actually doing things. I mean, she's actually taking up from where we left off, and that is very good, because if she takes up and if she follows exactly what our plan was, that will help in terms of the gender empowerment that we're talking about. One thing that I would add to that is making sure that the institutions actually work. She spoke to the issue of gender-based violence, and we need to do an awful lot of work because we actually have an increase now. And I was telling you about the program that I went to. Access to pornography is a big issue, and we had a big discussion on that. Access to pornography and the extent to which this has links with what is happening in terms of gender-based violence, what is happening in terms of defilement and rape and the other sexual forms of violence. And even we also talked about the films. So these are all issues that we need to look at. But very importantly is also the issue of resources, financial resources for the institutions for the Domestic Violence and Victim Support Unit. I was talking about it this morning, that it was created in 1998, and it was actually Mrs. Betty Moldidrisu that got us going with IGP Peter Namfuri. And it's grown to be a key institution for protection of women's rights and for ensuring that we are able to enforce gender rights. And we need the financial resources for the Domestic Violence and Victim Support Unit. I have been through the country and I've seen the amazing work, and IGP, congratulations. Owusua, congratulations on the work, and all the officers who work with DOFSU, the dedication and the work that they're doing. And we need to give them more resources to ensure that they're able to better protect and they're able to better prevent gender-based violence.
Okay.
And so that's the pressing for progress. Now, like you said, we've walked, we've talked. Now we just need to put the resources there and make sure that the institutions are working. Social welfare, social services, really down, and we need to put resources in there to ensure that the social services also works. And parenting. We've reached a point in time in Ghana where we would need to deliberately teach parenting.
Okay.
Because we have new dynamics, we have a new context, we have a new environment, and we will have to teach young parents and people, the community, what it takes to be a parent. I think this is very important. And one thing that we also need to do in terms of addressing the poverty is to make sure that parents are responsible for their children. So what we had in mind as a government was to create an institution that will ensure that at the end of the month, recalcitrant parents who were not paying maintenance or were not paying feeding, were not feeding their children or not maintaining their children, would automatically maintain. So now that we have the TIN number, that is an opportunity, and we can actually do that. So these are things that we can put in place that would help to ensure that the children are looked after and that they don't pour onto the streets because of lack of care.
Well, very interesting there, hearing from the former Minister for Gender, and she's very passionate about what she does. Let's look at women in decision making, and fortunately or unfortunately, we say that we've made some progress. In Parliament, for instance, you mentioned earlier, we have just 35 women out of the 275. I mean, that's not encouraging. Why are we not getting the numbers? Are we scared as women, or it's just that we're lazy?
No, we're not scared, and unfortunately I don't have the data, but you can even see that there's an increase. If you look at the Electoral Commission data, you realize that there's actually an increase in the numbers of women who stand for office, who stand as parliamentary candidates, but unfortunately they don't win. And like I said, it's basically because of the first past the post political system. And so I've always said that Ashanti region is a stronghold of NPP, Volta region is a stronghold of NDC. So why don't you place women
and
there just to make sure? Because in some other African countries, like in Mozambique, I think, for them, what they do is that there's affirmative action and it's done at the political party level. We know that some of our political parties, it was started by CPP. In fact, the Reform Party did it first, and then CPP did it, and then it's been adopted by the other political parties, where they give a 50% rebate for fees for women who want to stand. But I believe that the political parties need to do a lot more, and I'm happy that UNDP is looking at strengthening political parties. I think they're doing some capacity building, but we need to strengthen the women wings so that they can be a force to reckon with, because that was what the ANC women's wing did. When there was the negotiation post-apartheid and ANC was coming in now as a recognized political party, because of the role that the women had played in fighting against apartheid, and during the negotiations that is whether 1994, 96 or so, they were able to get onto the table, the negotiating table. So I believe that the women wings of our respective political parties need to be able to negotiate this. They must be political party blind. They must come together, speak to this issue, and make sure that women within the political parties have much more leverage than they do now. And I believe that will help. And for the numbers, let's hold the political parties to task, and let's look at the manifestos and look at what they say about what they will do with women, for women, by women, and hold them to it. And civil society has also played a great role. We know that a few years back we had the Women's Manifesto, and that spelled out a lot in terms of what we wanted as women in Ghana. And civil society is still out there articulating, communicating, advocating for gender equality. And we have the new face, the new wing, the Pepper Them, who are doing marvelously well. And I'm hoping that this will be, well, I haven't heard much on Sugar Them and Pamper Them in terms of some of these critical issues.
Right.
And I'm hoping that they would all join and make sure that we have more women in political office, because the more women we get, the better it will be for us in terms of having women, own women speaking to these issues that are sensitive to us.
Okay, so the more women we have in decision making, the better for all of us. We'll take another break on PM Express. When we come back, Amnesty International wants an extension of maternity leave. I agree. Do you agree? When we come back, we'll find out. This is PM Express. We're having some very interesting conversations, and I'm very passionate. And the one I am with in the studio is also very passionate about women. How do women progress? And that's what the agenda we've all been chatting all this while. So before we went on the break, I talked about Amnesty International, and of course it's been a very dicey issue over there. People get pregnant and they're giving just 3 months to go on leave. So after 3 months, your baby is 3 months and you're leaving your baby in the hands of someone else and you're coming back to job. How much attention would you have for the job? Does it affect productivity? Well, Amnesty International says we need more for the women. What do you think?
Yes, I was reading my Facebook and I saw a post by Kojo Beduado, and he's advocating for 6 months.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, for 6 months. It's an issue that we really need to look at as a country, because this is the future generation and it is a problem. We have young mothers who are struggling across the country in terms of care, because first we had mothers helping, and now it's more of a nuclear family. And so typically you would still have the young mother. As a minister, I realized that it was actually social welfare that was in charge of education from age 0 or day 1 or whatever to 3 years. And we did a small survey and realized that for the early childhood centers and all that, 80%, just a small one, 80% of the ones that social welfare visited, actually the teachers, the 80% were not trained. And that is a problem, because we know that those are the formative years of children. And so there's a need for us as a country to look critically at early childhood development. There's a need for us to look at that.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the parenting you talked about.
Parenting.
Because if at 3 months you start leaving your child in the hands of people, what kind of parenting are you giving your children?
Well, if you have to go to work, then you may not have a choice. But if we review our law on maternity leave, maybe that could help. Now we have the internet, and mothers could work from home. We could have paternity leave also. That is provided the men actually stay at home and look after the children. Would make sure that actually happens. But with the internet, there could be some amount of flexibility. And I remember that the 31st December women helped and supported the creation or establishment of daycare centers near workplaces. There were daycare centers in markets, there were daycare centers in public places, in communities, and also near workplaces. I remember the one near the old passport office and one at the Makola market. We need to go back to that because young women are really having a challenging and difficult time. It's stressful, and then also the children are not well looked after, and then what happens to our future generation?
So of course it's something that we
I was also advocate for 6 months.
6 months.
6 months, yeah.
Or maybe more.
6 months should be fine. 6 months should
All
be
right,
fine.
but let's go back to one of the agendas that was very your favorite, or want of a better word, dear to your heart, and you mentioned it earlier, closing the witch camps in our communities, and of course you succeeded in closing one of the witch camps. How do you feel coming to realize that those camps still exist?
It was one of the things I would never forget. That morning we went to the witch camp. I mean, like, we had to go, and with support from Action Aid, and there's actually a coalition of NGOs who work with the witch camps. And you know, the former First Lady, Mrs. Lodi Namahama, also supported a lot and helped, was supporting to build a vocational institution for the Gambaga witch camps. So there are about 6. And with support from Action Aid, the then Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection reintegrated 55 women alleged to be witches, and then closed the Bunyase. And I'll recount one thing where the nights before this, there were like 2 days, they were performing rituals and what have you. And all the chiefs, in the morning we drove there, all the chiefs were there, and they said they had to kill a fowl. I'm like, but you'd been doing the rituals for 2 days, and then they were like, the fowl will have, when they kill it, it has to lie in a certain way. Otherwise we can't go ahead. I'm like, it's been months. You know, this has been months. We've been negotiating.
In the event that the fowl doesn't lie the way they want.
Thank God they didn't tell me before. That would have been so stressful.
Right.
But fortunately, when they killed the fowl lay exactly how they like in a certain way that was acceptable. I'm like, thank God. But for me, it was good I wasn't told before, because it would have been another wahala. You know. So, but you could see the joy of the women. But then what really struck me was the one in charge of the Bunyase was an elderly woman too, and she was almost in tears that all these women are leaving her. Who is she going to talk to, and all that. So I mean, that was a very, 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 very interesting.
Couldn't she integrate herself in the society?
No, I mean, she was living, I mean, like she was living in that community.
Okay.
But she had lived with the women all her life, and now they were going back to their communities. But there are a lot of dynamics, because when we went there, we realized that it was because, like, the chiefs were like, well, we sit in our palaces, and the young men come and say, this woman is a witch and all that, and we have to go through the rituals.
Is that the reason we haven't been able to close the others?
It has to do with the custom, the tradition. It's still the same custom and tradition. And so for Bunyasi, for instance, there was a lot of backwards, and we had to engage, we had to explain, they had to understand. The women, also the 55 women, they were not all from Bunyasi, from other witch camps. So, because this has been a program that has been going on. So they had to talk to their communities for their families to accept them.
So what advice would you give to the current minister, so she can also get it done, because people think it's long overdue?
There's a blueprint, and I'm sure if she goes through that, because it was a whole engagement with even with the women alleged to be witches.
Once we've been able to close one, I mean, closing the others shouldn't be
difficult.
There
are different dynamics for each witch camp. They are different. I think there are about 6. Okay. There are different dynamics, so they are managed by different communities and different traditional traditional groups and what have you.
Right.
And so so we looked at 3 different interventions. So the last was closing down, but before it's closed down, government said under the NDC that we would support. So there was humanitarian interventions like the LEAP. So the women, the inmates were receiving LEAP. They were receiving other social services. We were even able to do the free national health insurance for them, so that though they had not, the camp had not been closed, we still had, they were able to get access to health care. We're trying to make sure that the children who were in the camps would go to school, and these interventions. So the last resort was actually to close down, but that would be a lot of negotiations and getting the women in the camp to go back to their communities, going to talk to their communities, the traditional leaders,
for them
especially
to accept
them when they come in.
Well, one more thing away from the witch comes, and we've always heard that behind every successful man is a woman, but I mean, when you turn the coin the other way around, you often don't hear that. So who will be behind the successful woman? Is it possible to get the men to come along with us? Because we've heard stories that most often it's the men who even try to prevent the women from getting up there.
Men are supportive. Some men are supportive. Families are also supportive. Communities. It's actually the notions, it's actually the norms, it's actually the perceptions of who a woman should be and what her standing should be. So if we get a deeper understanding, if the society, if the community, if our husbands, if our wives, if the family understand, then the Ghanaian woman would be well placed to provide and support the development of Mother Ghana.
Well, all too soon. And on that note, we end PM Express tonight. Many thanks for watching. Thank you so much for coming. We're extremely grateful for your time.
Thank you.
I know Yelitha is former Minister for Gender, Women and Children Protection. So let's gender, children and social protection. Let's keep the conversation tight. Let's keep pushing government to pass the affirmative action bill. In fact, let's not stop pressing for progress. My name is Aisha Ibrahim. I know